Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naraban Dracovin, Lord Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the clans and bloodlines of Vampire the Masquerade. When we last left off, we've been diving into the bloodlines, and we were talking about the Cappadocian bloodlines. I've got two more Cappadocian bloodlines for you today. Let's start with the first one, the Lamia. Now, the Lamia, as I said, are a Cappadocian bloodline, founded by, of course, Lamia. Members of this bloodline acted as dervishes and warriors for the Cappadocians until their effective extinction, or the deaths of them, around the 1444. Basically when the Giovanni went after them and diablerized most of them right away. We've seen what the result of this is, basically in some of my other videos, which I talked about the Cappadocians and Harbingers skulls. But the Lamia themselves had the disciplines of fortitude / demos, mortis / necromancy, and potence. I'll talk about the differences these had. Lamia herself, the founder, was said to have been diabolized by Augustus Giovanni himself during this time period, the fall of the Cappadocians. The result actually was the tainted kiss, basically, of the Lamias, passed on to the Giovanni to a degree, making sure that they had that curse of a very painful kiss. Basically, it's very painful to those that they drink blood from. So you can see there was a probably negative result as to Giovanni diablerizing Lamia. Now, Lamia themselves are basically a bloodline that is devoted to Clan Cappadocian and acts as their warrior, but they are also devoted to Lilith, the Dark Mother. Lamia herself is said to have been a daughter of the Dark Mother, descendant of her. And stories say that when Lazarus discovered her in the midst of her rituals to Lilith herself, he was so impressed that he decided to embrace her, to bring her into the fold of the Cappadocians. Lazarus, of course, being one of the very few Cappadocians still alive. Now, Lamia herself then basically died and came back, and as a result of this change, had strange visions of both her own blood's future and the Cappadocian future. It is said that she whispered those to Lazarus, and that is one of the reasons that he was away from everything that happens, the Feast of Folly, and the massacres that occurred, and the end of the Cappadocians, that her warning caused him to shy away. Now, Lamia herself did find her way to the Cappadocians, where her bloodline became the guardians of them, as warriors and bodyguards, and their numbers were never quite numerous. The sheer fact is, they have this weakness that their kiss itself brings forth this disease, carried this disease, this plague with it. So they didn't try to spread it very much. So feeding was a problem, they kept their numbers down. And though they seemed loyal to the Cappadocians, they were always loyal to their Dark Mother Lilith above all. Now, they traveled with the Cappadocians during the medieval period when they headed, of course, to Europe. They were with them during the time, and as the Giovanni turned and basically diablerized the majority of them and then started slaughtering the rest of them, they too suffered the same persecutions that the Cappadocians did at the behest of the Giovanni and then the Camarilla. Lamia itself is said to have been destroyed by Augustus Giovanni. The last known Lamia was said to have been killed in 1718. Beyond there is no records of any existing. Now, first and foremost, the Lamia were a cult to the worship of Lilith, with rituals and devotions to her specifically. This meant that the majority of those embraced were in fact female, because female did have a higher ranking within the Lamia. This doesn't mean that men didn't become Lamias too. It's just in lower number, because they did tend to be more second class in this situation, because of the nature of the cult. Within the Lamia society, there was a very powerful sire and child relationship. They would bond and be together for at least a year, where the sire would teach the child all the combat techniques that they would need to know in order to develop themselves into the powerful warriors they were. This meant they had a very powerful bond. And Lamia herself was seen to be very loyal to the clan itself, having, of course, ordered all the rest of her bloodline to serve the Cappadocians as these warriors. Again, second, of course, to the Dark Mother. Now, their weakness is an extension of their worship of death in relation to the Dark Mother. They suffer from something called the Seed of Lilith. This is a powerful virulent that is within them that they possibly can spread through their kiss. It functions much like the bubonic plague, the Black Death. And the fact is, it is more virulent to men than it is to women. More than likely, if you're a man and you're kissed by a Lamia, you are going to get it. A woman, you might get lucky. But regardless, if you are infected with it, within days, a mortal will die to it. Now, if another vampire should feed from a Lamia, they become carriers of this disease and will spread it through their kiss too. They can purge themselves of this, though, if they purge all the Lamia blood from them, meaning that they can effectively remove the disease by doing that. Now, why they are loyal to the Cappadocians, they are technically separate from them because of their worship of the Dark Mother, Lilith. They are also much more passionate and emotional than the Cappadocians are, and devoted to, of course, a warrior lifestyle, which made them the protectors, the bodyguards of the Cappadocians. Now, during the Middle Ages, they were kind of in between the high clans and low clans because they technically weren't a clan themselves. When people would look to them, they would consider them a member of the Cappadocians. They were seen as to have a level of respect because they were such powerful soldiers and so devoted. And the fact that they were such loyal servants, they did earn a monochrome of respect from this. Now, traditionally, many of them come from Mediterranean stock that were embraced, but when they began to spread throughout Europe, many of those locations also saw Lamia from those groups embraced also. And the fact is, the majority of Lamia that were embraced were, of course, women. Though, just like there were still some men that were embraced, many of these women, in fact, dressed like men because a lot of armor and equipment that was used for warriors and battle were really made for men. So, of course, when they would wear these, more than often, many of them looked like men. Now, of course, as I said, they almost exclusively embraced from women. They didn't necessarily need to. A couple of men did get in there. But those women that they embraced tended not to be warriors, because it's the Dark Ages, and very few women learn any actual combat abilities. So many of these, they would have to teach their combat abilities, though they would look to those that were connected to death. Whether this is those that had either contemplated suicide, attempted suicide, maybe murdered someone, or even if they had some interests in black and dark arts. All these type of women were very good choices for them to basically embrace and bring into the fold. Now, of course, they would haven with their Cappadocian sires, but if they were havening on their own, they would choose things like graveyards with cemeteries and sarcophagi, because of their basically plague they would spread. They would oftentimes feed on the recently dead in order to get the vitae they needed. It was a technique that many of them used in order to prevent the spread of their own plague. Now, the main differences as the versions have moved into the V20 series, the 20th anniversary, is we saw Demos basically becoming a part of Mortis itself, Mortis evolving into necromancy, and then we saw basically they get Fortitude to replace Demos, and then we have necromancy. So technically speaking, in the current version, they would have Fortitude, necromancy, and potence, though those other two did exist in the old days as disciplines that they had. Now let's move on to the other bloodline of the Cappadocians I want to talk about today, the Pisanob, which are a group of Central American, South American necromancers that have aligned themselves with the Giovanni. They are led by Pochtli, a powerful theoretical Cappadocian necromancer that has aligned his bloodline with the Giovanni itself. Said to have been embraced into Cappadocians before basically the elaboration of Cappadocius, but aligning himself, of course, with the Giovanni when things occurred. Their history dates back to, of course, the 16th century. Basically, they braced themselves into the clan of death at the time in order to avoid some of the problems with their own extinction. They were a group of necromancers facing extinction within the New World. And by joining with, of course, Giovanni, eventually, they saw themselves being saved and becoming vampires. It's because of this interesting reason, their forms of necromancy and the rituals they have are vastly different than those that the Giovanni use. Now, many of their havens and temples within the Mexico's hinterlands have remained secure. Their outlying temples have seen themselves to be compromised by their many enemies, including the Sabbat and the Harbingers of Skulls themselves. And the Sixth Great Maelstrom affected them greatly, destroying instantaneously half of their phantom spirits that they had serving them, opening themselves up to dark spirits which were looking for vengeance, opening them up to the world, many of which had actually been with the group here from before Columbus came to America and had been waiting for their chances to basically get revenge against them, to go against them and attack them. So the only reason the head temple of Pochtli survived was because the Sixth Great Maelstrom was just as damaging to the Pisanob's enemies as it was to them. Everyone was caught off guard. It blindsided them and caused a lot of damage, but it did to their enemies too. Now they're still dealing with the after effects. The Harbingers of Skulls were hit by this too and has prevented them from overwhelming this Giovanni-aligned group within South America. Also, now they've been dealing with new hunters that have seemingly arisen, that have called like this voice of God upon them to basically purify them. So now they are besieged on many sides, with enemies that they've always had still there. They've been weakened, with human hunters there, that their power structure within South America and Central America has been weakening. So secretly, the Pisanob have been fearing Gehenna and the results of it. So they've been turning to ancient Aztec rituals, very dark rituals, in order to attempt to prevent this. They've been gathering kindred hearts, basically sacrificing kindred and taking their hearts, preserving them, making sure they remain, in order to appease the great powers that will arrive with Gehenna. They feared the Giovanni finding out about this because they are not in a position of strength. They technically never really were. And they fear that the Giovanni would have great repercussions against them for the dark rituals they are enacting here. They are technically slaughtering other kindred. But that's it for today. I introduce you to two bloodlines of the Cappadocians. One, the Lamia, a nearly all-female group of powerful warriors which were once the protectors of the Cappadocians, and unfortunately suffered just like they did at the hands of the Giovanni and eventually the Camarilla. We saw their extinction, pretty much the same way we saw the majority of the Cappadocians go extinct. We do know a few survived, those that become the Harbingers of Skull. Lazarus survived from the Cappadocians, so it is not impossible to say that maybe a Lamia or two survived out there, but we have not heard from them. So we do not know if any remain. They are thought to be extinct. Then we talked about Pisanob, which is a group of South American necromancers, which it seems were technically embraced into the Cappadocian clan originally, though they are aligned with the Giovanni. It's hard to say because they seemingly were embraced around the same time that things began to change within this period, whether or not this entire result is different. It seems, from information that we have, that the original is more than likely have been embraced in the Cappadocians before Cappadocius fell to Giovanni. Regardless, they are a group of necromancers within South America with their own way of doing things different than the Giovanni, and with their own enemies. They do fight against the Sabbat, the Harbingers of Skulls, and now after the Sixth Great Maelstrom, where everything is seemingly destabilized in this area, that you have dark spirits that have been they've been keeping in check since before they were embraced, and the Harbingers are still there, and the Sabbat on their rampages. Their power structure begins to crumble. Hunters are at their heels, but they do survive, and they prepare for the coming Gehenna in a very dark and twisted way. Now, whether or not this will actually help, unknown. And whether or not the Giovanni, should they discover what's going on, how they will react, is another thing entirely. For they fear the Giovanni finding out about their rituals. If you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It should support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon. Link in the description below. There's some great rewards there. It helps to grow and improve the channel. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.